No.
And we are the Group 4. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones who make the...
So first, let's talk about mortgage. So mortgage is a contract whereby the debtor secures to the creditor the fulfillment of principal obligation, especially subjecting to such security immovable property or real rights over immovable property in case the principal obligation is not complied with at the time stipulated. So eto ngayon, himay-himayin muna natin yung mortgage in order to understand it thoroughly. So, mortgage daw is a contract. So, mortgage contract is the accessory contract in principal obligation. Ngayon, mayroon kasing sinasabi na accessory contract would not exist if there is no principal obligation. So, yung mortgage, meaning yung mortgage, kina-constitute lang siya in order to secure the fulfillment of principal obligation. So, next, sa contract, nandiyan yung debtor. So, si debtor is also the mortgagor. So, debtor or mortgagor secures an immovable property in relation to fulfillment of principal obligation. Need na absolute owner si mortgagor ng property na imo-mortgage, otherwise, the contract is void. Ang exception lang sa rule is kapag magko-constitute si mortgagor ng third party or third person na siyang mag-mortgage ng property sa loan. Kapag mag-constitute ng third party, dapat recorded sa Registry of Property and annotated sa Register of Deeds para maging effective yon against sa third person na not party ng consideration. Kasi in terms of default payments, yung last resort ni mortgagee or the creditor ay yung secured property. So, pwede niyang kunin yung rights dun sa mortgage property kapag hindi na talaga magbabayad si mortgagor ng principal obligation. So, yun yung ibebenta niya in order to fulfill yung defaulted na payment ni mortgagor sa loan. So, next, merong creditor. So, si creditor is also referred as the mortgagee. Most common form ng mortgagee or ng creditor sa mortgage is financial institution or yung mga lending companies. Next is the principal obligation. So, it is the obligation which arises from principal object of the engagement which has been contracted between the parties. So, in terms of sa utang, kasi yung mortgage, hindi siya mag-exist kapag walang principal obligation. Ibig sabihin, yung loan mismo, yun yung principal obligation. Yung mortgage, yan lang yung isi-secure mo in order to secure mo yung fulfillment ng principal obligation, which is the loan. So, next, ano ba yung mga imo-mortgage mo? Ano ba yung mga ito-constitute mo in order to secure the fulfillment of principal obligation. So, ano dyan yung immovable property or rights. So, sa mortgage, ang pwede lang i-secure is yung mga immovable property or yung mga alienable rights or transferable rights. So, dyan sa immovable property, ano dyan yung sinasabi na late FAMS co-mid. So, ano dyan yung land, trees, everything attached to immovables, fertilizers used in land, animal house, machineries, statues and reliefs, contracts, mines and quarries, and docks and structures. Yun yung consisted ng immovable property. Yung sa rights naman or yung mga alienable rights or transferable rights, yun naman yung mga rights na attached to thing or property, for example, yung ownership, mortgage, and etc. So next, ito naman, time is stipulated in mortgage. Contract is not complied. Ito in case to sa mga default payments. Yung mortgage property mo will be foreclosed and it will mean the contract is void. So, Kapag foreclose na, dito na papasok yung public bidding. Tapos na nating bigyan ng emphasis yung mga points to remember in mortgage. So now, let's proceed to the example. Jenna borrowed 100,000 from Bea Bank. The term of the loan is 1 year, payable monthly, discounted at 10%. Non-payment of instant for 3 months will make the loan demandable. As a security, Jenna mortgaged her house in Parañaque for the same. 6 months after, Jenna has not paid any installment yet and demand notice was given. Bea Bank foreclosed the house and sold it to Annalie in public bidding. So, kailangan nating malaman sino ba yung mortgagor, mortgagee, ano yung principal obligation, at ano yung accessory contract sa given na example. So, eto na. So, sinasabi dyan na si Jenna, siya yung mortgagor or siya yung debtor. Si Bea Bank, siya yung mortgagee or the creditor kasi bank na. So, isa siyang financial institution. So, tapos, yung principal obligation naman ni mortgagor ay yung 100,000 and syempre yung mga underlying conditions ng or yung mga term of the loan. Tapos, lastly, yung accessory contract, yan yung mortgage of house in Parañaque, Jenna, in order to secure the principal obligation, which is the 100,000 loan. So, dyan sa given example, masasabi bang tapos na tayo? Syempre, hindi pa. Kasi, may conditions pa na sinasabi sa example, which is nasa babang part na example. So, ilan ba yung months na magre-result yung loan to demandable in full? Diba 3 months? Kaso, dyan, sinasabi dyan na 6 months na di pa rin nakakabayad si mortgagor. E di walang choice si mortgagee kundi ang magbigay ng demand notice. Kasi dapat ang nang i-inform sa contract ay yung nagpautang, dapat lagi siyang active. Kaso, wala pang pera si mortgagor, kaya ayun, wala siyang choice kundi i-foreclose or i-public bid or i-sold yung each property kay Annalie in public bidding. Naguluhan ba kayo lalo? Baka naguluhan kayo lalo. Ito na lang. Dito, I made my own timeline dun sa kung ano man yung naintindihan ko sa mortgage. So, i-share ko to sa inyo. So, para mas mabilis siyang maintindihan, kailangan gagawa tayo ng representation. So, here it is. So, una, syempre sa mortgage, mangungutang ka muna. Tapos, kapag nangutang ka na, isi-secure mo yung inutang mo. So, mag-mortgage ka in order to secure nga yung inutang mo or the principal obligation. So, next, syempre dapat magbabayad ka. Kaso, dito, hindi ka nakapagbayad kaya nag-default payments ka. So, kapag nag-default payments ka, magkakaroon ka ng demand notice. Ibig sabihin, kapag may demand notice na, demandable in full na yung obligation mo na dapat installment lang. So, dito, mai-extinguish lang yung contract. So, next ng default payments, syempre kung bago tayo mag-proceed after ng default payments, meron in between dyan. Syempre kung good credit ka, pwedeng ma-extinguish yung contract. Sa extinguishment of contract, dito masasabi na yung loan is paid ng full. Ibig sabihin, yung interest, penalties, and such, yung mga principal obligation, yung principal ay paid in full. So, dyan ma-extinguish yung contract kasi nga, syempre, bayad na So, mababalik na sa'yo yung property na sinecure mo. So, let's proceed. So, syempre, nag-default ka na ng payments, meron ng demand notice. So, next na yan, yung right of foreclosure. Dito, dapat i-take hindi mo i-take for granted yung time between default payments and before right of foreclosure, kasi may mga certain things na pwedeng mangyari dyan which will able for you to redeem the mortgage property. So dyan, kapag may right of foreclosure na, syempre mayroon ng sale in public auction. So ang huling-huli niyan, which is dapat hindi mo na ipapaabot doon, is yung transfer of land title. Ibig sabihin, ito transfer mo na yung titulo or ipapangalan na sa bumili sa public bidding yung titulo ng land mo. So dapat hindi mo na dyan papaabutin kasi as a mortgager, wala ka nang magiging remedy kapag yung land title ay napasa na dun sa highest bidder in public auction. Nung pinpublic auction yung property mo. So, let's now proceed to the rights of the mortgagor. So, ano ba yung unang right ni mortgagor? So, ito yung redemption. Redemption is a transaction by which the mortgagor reacquired or buys back the value of the title which may have passed under the mortgage or divest the mortgage premises of the lien which the mortgage may have created. So, dito, in case to kapag default payments na, ma-redeem mo lang yung mortgage property as long as the mortgage money is given or na-repay back mo na yung mortgage money. So, buong loan, dapat bayad na, pati yung mga penalties, interest, or expenses. Then, that's the time na yung mortgagor i-require niya yung mortgagee to deliver the mortgage deeds or yung mga documents under ng mortgage property na nasa possession ni mortgagee. So, wala nang effect yung pagiging lien holder ni mortgagee kasi syempre, bayad na yung principal obligation. So, merong kinds yung redemption. Diyan yung equity of redemption and yung right of redemption. So, first, yung equity of redemption. So, equity of redemption is the right of the mortgagor to redeem the mortgage property after his default in performance of the conditions of the mortgage within the 90-day period from the date of the service of the order of foreclosure but before the confirmation of sale. So, it applies to judicial foreclosure. Ibig sabihin yung mga foreclosure under rules of the court of real and chattel mortgage. So, punta tayo sa example. So, ito yung example. Joanna borrowed 100,000 from Bea Bank. The term of the loan is 1 year, payable monthly, discounted at 10%. Non-payment of installment in 3 months will make the loan demandable. As security, Joanna mortgaged her house in Parañaque. 5 months after, Joanna was given a demand notice from Bea Bank. She wanted to retain her house, so she found another source of money and paid off the principal and penalties before Bea Bank foreclosed her house in Parañaque. So, take note na dyan na principal and penalties na lang yung pinayaran ni Jenna kay Bea Bank kasi discounted na siya at 10%. So, ibig sabihin, naka-embed na yung interest dun sa loan. So, dito, titignan sa, tatandaan dun sa redemption, yung sa kinds of redemption, magmamatter lang dyan yung date kung kailan pwede exercise yung equity of redemption or yung right of redemption. So, dito, from that, mula sa demand notice but before the right of foreclosure, nandiyan yung mga terms kung kailan pwede exercise yung equity of redemption. So, una, kailangan meron ka mo ng court order from that date, 90 day from that date, or even after, basta wala ka pang nare-receive na confirmation of sale, nandiyan yung equity of redemption. So, ibig sabihin, before foreclosure siya. So, let's proceed to right of redemption para ma-distinguish natin siya to equity of redemption. So, next, yung right of redemption is the right of the mortgagor to redeem the mortgage property within 1 year from the date of the registration of the certificate of sales. So, It applies only to extrajudicial foreclosure o yung um, mga mortgage property na nabigyan na special power of attorney to na pwedeng i-public auction of real mortgage. So, ibig sabihin, real mortgage lang. Sa equity of redemption kanina, judicial foreclosure ng real and chattel. Dito sa right of redemption, extrajudicial foreclosure ng real mortgage lang. So, Jenna borrowed 100,000 from Bea Bank. The term of loan is 1 year payable monthly, discounted at 10%. Non-payment of installment in 3 months will make the loan demandable. As security, Jenna mortgaged her house in Parañaque. 5 months after, Jenna was given a demand notice from Bea Bank. Jenna has no money, but she wanted to retain her house in Parañaque. 4 months has passed. Jenna finally borrowed money from Liza, but Bea Bank foreclosed the property and sold it to Annalie in public bidding. The certificate of sale is not yet given to Annalie, so Jenna took that opportunity to repay the mortgage money. So dito, sinasabi ko ulit na ang kailangan mo lang malaman is kung kailan mo i-exercise yung right of redemption. So, ano dyan yung timeline. So, ano dyan, una dyan is yung demand notice. So, nabigay na yung demand notice after 5 months na nag-default ng payment si Jenna. So, within right of foreclosure, basta before certificate of sale, ano dyan yung right of redemption. So, ibig sabihin, sa right of redemption, after na siya ng foreclosure. Diba sa equity of redemption kanina, before foreclosure. Ito naman sa right of redemption, after foreclosure na siya. So, nung time na yung registration of certificate of sale ay pinaprocess na within 1 year dyan. But before yung certificate of sale, kailangan exercise mo na yung right of redemption. Yan. Dapat magbayad ka na ng mortgage money in order for you to redeem back yung property mo. Doon sa mortgage money, syempre, doon na yung principal, yung penalties, interest, and expenses na babayaran para ma-redeem back mo yung property. Sinasabi din, right of redemption is inalienable right yun ni mortgagor. Ibig sabihin, it cannot be taken away from him by provisions of contract. Pero, within certain time lang dapat yun na-exercise. Kasi, in order to preserve naman yung right ni mortgagee to foreclosure. Yung exercise of redemption will extinguish the right of foreclosure, and the exercise of right of foreclosure will extinguish the right of redemption. So, conclusion dyan sa redemption, with your of redemption, dapat exercise or magbayad ka ng mortgage money before foreclosure or yung before right of foreclosure. Kaya right of redemption naman, dapat after right of foreclosure but before issuance of certificate of sale. So, next ay yung exception. So, juridical persons whose property is being sold pursuant to an extrajudicial foreclosure shall have the right to redeem the property until, but not after, the registration of the certificate of foreclosure sale with applicable register of deeds, which is no case shall be more than 3 months after foreclosure, whichever is earlier. So, sinasabi lang dito na in case of juridical person o yung mga companies na nag-mortgage ng property, pwede nilang i-redeem back yung property nila until registration of certificate of foreclosure sale with applicable registration in register of deeds, which shall be less than 3 months. Ano man yung mauna dun sa dalawa. So, next, right of mortgagor is right to transfer to third person. The mortgagor may assign the mortgage debt and transfer the mortgage property to third person directed by him instead of retransferring the property to him. Dito, may papasok sa eksena na wala naman sa contract, which is yung third party. Siya yung sasalo sa mortgagor sa pagbabayad ng mortgage money. So, bayad na lahat ng utang mo. Ngayon, sa third party ka na may utang. Tapos, yung mortgage property mo from mortgagee, ay ita-transfer niya na directly to third party. Di na dadaan sa'yo. So, mag-a-arise yung ganito kapag demandable lang din yung mortgage debt. So, bigyan tayo na example. So, example, ito, same example lang din, yung si Jenna, siya yung borrower ng utang ng 100,000 kay Bea Bank. So, term of loan is 1 year, payable monthly, 10% discounted. Tapos, 3 months, non-payment of installment will make the debt demandable. So, dito, after 5 months, Jenna was given a demand notice. So, Jenna has no money, but really wanted to retain her house in Paranaque. She asked her friend, Rose, if she could pay her loan in Bea Bank in return. She'll mortgage her house in Paranaque for 100,000 plus penalties, if any, that Rose will pay to Bea Bank. So, dito, si Rose yung third party na pinagbayad ni Jenna or hiningaan ng favor ni Jenna or inutangan ni Jenna na siyang magbabayad ng utang ni Jenna kay Bea Bank. So, ibig sabihin, may extinguish na yung contract kay Bea Bank. Tapos, magkakaroon ka ng another contract with the third party, which is Rose. Next right ni mortgagor is yung right to inspection and production of documents. So, andito yung the mortgagor who has handed over the title deeds or other documents relating to the mortgage property to the mortgagee is entitled to inspect those documents at reasonable time and at a cost of him. So, another right ni mortgagor na mag-request yung mortgage deeds na ma-inspect niya na nasa possession ni mortgagee kasi malay niya napalitan na pala yung nakapangalan sa titulo ng bahay or lupa. Para naman mapanatag si mortgagor, magre-request siya at reasonable time. Wag naman yung kunyari na paranoid ka lang sa gabi kasi pamana pala yung property ng mga ninunuan mo na. Pati call center agent ng bank ay nagalit ka at nagdemand na makita yung mga papeles nung time na paranoid ka. So, kapag gusto mong kumuha ng abstracts or extracts ng documents, so kailangan mong mag-request, and yung mga expense kapag kukuha ka ng mga copy is isi-shoulder mo. So, next right ni mortgagor is yung right to redeem separately or simultaneously. So, ito, a mortgagor who has executed 2 or more mortgages in favor of the same mortgagee shall, in absence of a contract to the contrary, when the principal money of any 2 or more of the mortgages has become due, be entitled to redeem any one such mortgage separately or any 2 or more of such mortgage together. So, ito lang yung kapag mataming mortgage property sa isang obligation. Sinasabi lang dyan na kapag nabayaran mo na yung equivalent value ng isang property sa principal obligation, pwede na i-redeem yung same equivalent na property kasi nga madami ka namang minortgage na property. So, kung equivalent ng dalawa yung nag-due at nabayaran mo na, edi dalawang property yung pwede mong i-redeem back kasi bayad mo na yon. So, take note dito, dapat mag-due muna yung yung principal obligation before mo ma-exercise yung right to redeem separately or simultaneously. Another right ni mortgagor ay yung right to accession, where mortgage property in possession of the mortgagee has, during the continuance of the mortgage, received any accession, the mortgagor upon redemption shall be entitled as against the mortgagee to such accession. So, yung mga accession, yun yung mga physical accretions or additions whether brought about by natural or artificial means. So, yung mga accession can be natural accession or acquired accession. So, ito yung mga nag-a-arise after i-mortgage yung property. Ibig sabihin na constitute na yung mortgage. Kung natural accession, wala dong karapatan si mortgagee na i-claim, lalo na kung bayad na yung principal obligation, tapos i-redeem na ni mortgagor yung mortgage property. Sa acquired naman, kung inseparable acquired accession, lalo na kung si mortgagee yung bumili nun and nilagay niya yon dun sa mortgage property and it cannot be separated dun sa mortgage property, then walang choice si mortgagor kundi bayaran yon. At kung separable acquired accession naman, pwedeng hindi, or kung gusto mong kunin yung separable acquired accession, need mo bayaran yung karampatang halaga nun kay mortgagee. So, next right of the mortgagor is yung right in case of waste. So, a mortgagor in possession of the mortgage property is not liable to the mortgagee for allowing the property to deteriorate, but he must not commit any act which is destructive or permanently injurious thereto, if the security is insufficient or will be rendered insufficient by such act. Ito kasi, di naman maiiwasan yung pagkasira ng property, lalo na yung na-adjust yung mga value. Since, ito, wala ditong intention si mortgagor, nasira lang talaga on its own, dahil siguro nakatenga, hindi ma-held liable si mortgagor. Pero, ginawan talaga ni mortgagor ng permanent na pagkakasira yung property kasi kunyari naisip niya na para walang makinabang, sisirain niya na lang yon. So, ang mangyayari, yung equivalent value nun ng mortgage property, syempre hindi na sapat to secure the mortgage debt. So, for the fulfillment of loan. Kaya, i-held liable si mortgagor and need niya na mag-additional security kay mortgagee. So, ito, yung sinasabi lang dito na magiging sufficient yung security unless the value of mortgage property exceeds by 1/3, or if consisting of buildings exceeds by 1/2 of the amount for the time being due in mortgage. Dito, masasabi lang na insufficient na yung mortgage property kapag yung value ay less than 1/3 na, or kapag naman building yung mortgage, less than 1/2 na lang yung amount nung time na naka-mortgage pa yung property. So, ito yung last na right ni mortgagor. So, ito ay rent to grant a lease. A mortgagor who is in lawful possession of the mortgage property shall have the power to make the lease the property which shall be binding on the mortgage. So, meaning to say, bago makapagpaupa si mortgagor, kailangan alam at may consent muna ni mortgagee since the right is alienated to him. So, dito, may mga certain conditions subject to right to grant a lease. So, una, the lease shall be such as would be made in ordinary course of management of the property concerned in accordance with any local law, custom, or usage. So, sabi lang dyan is dapat legal yung lease. So, second, the lease shall take effect from a date not later than 6 months from the date on which it is made. So, within 6 months, kailangan may umuupa na simula nung magbigay ng consent si mortgagee to list out the property. So, yung next condition, which is the third condition, the lease shall reserve the best rate reasonably be obtained, and no premium shall be paid or promised by the lessee, and no rent in advance should be paid. So, reservation of property is still important kahit naka-rent kasi security pa rin yun to the principal obligation ni mortgagor to the bank or to the mortgagee. Yung terms ay normal lang dapat tulad ng sa mga apartels na wala yung mga 1 month advance kasi it will mean na matagal-tagal na stay kapag may mga 1 month advance. So, the last condition is in case the mortgage property be a building, whether leased with or without the land on which they stand, the duration of the lease shall in no case exceed 3 years, and the lease shall contain a covenant for payment of the rent and a condition of free entry on the rent not being paid with the time therein specified. So, kapag building yung mortgage property mo, at the same time papaupahan mo rin, dapat hindi lalagpas ng 3 years yung contract of lease and may agreement for payment. Also, need ng condition for re-entry. Kapag terminate mo yung rental agreement at near-take mo yung possession of property kasi nag-break yung lease, yun na yung time na magre-re-entry ka na. So, that's it. Yung mga mentioned conditions, yung apat, must be fulfilled kasi kapag yung lease is exercised without fulfilling the said conditions, kasi kunyari rule breaker ka or trip mo lang, the mortgage is not bound by lease and pwede yun maging way ni mortgagee to talk with you and exclude niya sa contract of mortgage yung power mo as mortgagor to execute any lease on mortgage property. So, kailangan fulfilled siya.
So, the next topic is all about the obligation of the mortgagor. Pag sinabi natin na mortgagor, siya si debtor. So, first is the covenant for the title. Covenant for the title. The mortgagor is deemed to contract with the mortgagee that the interest which the mortgagor professes to transfer to the mortgagee subsists, in that the mortgagor has the power to transfer to the same. So, unang-una muna, ano ang ibig sabihin ng covenant? Pag sinabi natin na covenant, ito ay ang mga stipulations, contract, o agreement. So, covenant for the title, meaning, yung declaration or kagustuhan ni mortgagor to transfer the rights kay mortgagee is subsist. Ibig sabihin, existing. Pero sa part na ito, implied warranty ang nangyayari. So, kahit hindi sabihin ni mortgagor na yung mortgage niya, yung property niya kay mortgagee is ganun na rin ang mangyayari. So, narito ang example. Si A ay may utang na 5 million kay B. So, dahil sobrang laki ng utang ni A kay B, which is 5 million, naisip ni A na i-mortgage yung bahay niya kay B. Pero, sa part na to, wala pang stipulation o agreement na nangyayari sa pag-mortgage ng bahay ni A kay B. Plano pa lang ni A na i-mortgage yung bahay niya kay B since malaki yung utang niya, which is 5 million. So, sa gantong pangyayari, yung interest ni A para i-secure yung utang niya na 5 million kay B is nandun. Ang tawag dito ay covenant of the title. So, next is the defective titles. Defective titles, the mortgagor must indemnify the mortgagee for the defective title to the property. So, para mas lalo nating maintindihan ang defective titles, narito ang example. Si M ay may contract o agreement kay T kung saan yung bahay ni M ay naka-mortgage kay T sa utang na 5 million, which is due date sa 2021. Kung yung contract or agreement ni M kay T ay may defective yung bahay or may ginawang mali or kalokohan si M, yung 5 million na utang niya, kahit na due date is 2021, due and payable on demand na to ngayong 2020 dahil sa defective na nangyari dun sa bahay na naka-mortgage kay T. Ganun ang ibig sabihin ng defective of the title. And the next one is the covenant for the payment of rents. Covenant for the payment of rents. The mortgage property is leased. The mortgager must direct the rent payable under the lease to the mortgagee. So, para mas lalo nating maintindihan, narito ulit ang aking example. Si A ay may utang kay B na 1 million. Ginawa ni A, minortgage niya yung bahay niya kay B, kung saan sa bahay na to ay may nagre-rent, which is si C. Noong October 31, si C ay nagbayad kay A ng 50K. Ang dapat gawin ni A, yung 50K na na-receive niya kay C, ay dapat niya itong ibigay kay B. Ganito ang halimbawa ng covenant for the payment of rent. So, the next is payment of the public charges. Payment of the public charges. The mortgager is deemed to contract with the mortgagee that the mortgager will so long as the mortgagee is not in the possession of the mortgage property, pay all the public charges accruing due in respect of the property. So, ibig sabihin ng payment of public charges, kung yung property na naka-mortgage kay mortgagee is wala sa kanyang possession, syempre, obligation ni mortgager na bayaran kung ano man ang mga charges na nag-arise during the mortgage, tulad na lang ng mga taxes and interest. So, ganun pang ibig sabihin ng payment of the public charges. So, additional pala guys, kung yung property pala naka-mortgage ay may financial burden dahil sa unang mortgage na pinanggalingan neto, bago ito, minortgage sa'yo, baga second mortgage na ang nangyari. Tapos, may mga binabayaran pang interest si mortgager about sa prior mortgage. Kailangan bayaran to ni mortgager from time to time hanggang ma-fully paid. So, yun po ang lahat ng obligation of the mortgager.
Let us now proceed with the rights of the mortgagee. But before that, may naktak muna ako guys. So, pasantabi na lang po sa lahat ng mga nakikinig dyan. Pagpasensyahan niyo na po. So, knock. Mortgagee. Who is that mortgagee staring straight back at me? When will my reflection show who I am inside? Alright, so I hope na medyo nabuhay yung dugo natin dyan kahit paano. So, let's get it on. Okay, rights of the mortgagee. So, bakit nga ba nagkakaroon ng rights yung mortgagee? What are the objectives of this right? So, of course, it is used to protect them in the event the mortgager is unable to pay. So, para saan nga ba tong right na to? Para maprotektahan sila sa kung sakaling hindi makapagbayad si mortgagor. So, to avoid the risk, alam naman natin na sobrang laki ng risk once na nag-lend ka ng money or pera sa isang mortgagor. Kasi kadalasan, malaking pera yung pinapakawalan mo or pinapautang mo. So, sobrang laki ng risk nun kung wala kang protection. So guys, napakahalaga ng protection. Okay? So, ano nga ba yung ginagawa ni mortgagee? So, just to remind you guys, si mortgagee, siya si creditor. Alright. So, si mortgagee, nagka-create siya ng priority legal interest in case of default on the mortgage. So, what is legal interest? Si legal interest, it gives him the right of control over the property. So, nagbibigay ito ng right of control over the property kay mortgagee in case na ma-default yung mortgage. So, let us now proceed with the first right of mortgagee, the right to foreclosure of sale. So, what is foreclosure of sale? Ano nga ba tong foreclosure na to? It is the remedy of the creditor when the mortgagor fails to pay the mortgage. So, sinasubject the mortgagee yung mortgage property to the satisfaction of the principal obligations through a public auction kung saan yung proceeds na makukuha niya from that public auction will apply to the payment of his claim. So, it is a legal process din na kung saan na-forfeit yung ownership ni mortgagor doon sa property na minortgage niya. So sabi dito, at any time after the mortgage money has become due and before a decree has been made for the redemption of mortgage property or before the mortgage money has been paid or deposited, the mortgagee has a right to redeem the property or a decree that the property be sold. So para mas maintindihan natin kung kailan na-exercise or ma-exercise ni mortgagee yung right niya, let's see these 5 stages. So, the first stage would be the missed payments. So, alam naman natin na yung foreclosure, napakahabang proseso nito. So, nagsisimula to once na si mortgagor nag-fail to make timely mortgage payments. Nangyayari to dahil sa maaring nakaranas si mortgagor ng difficulty sa buhay, unemployment, or etc. Or meron din namang instances na si mortgagor intentionally niyang hindi binayaran yung obligation niya. Pero, the bottom line here is, whatever the reasons may be, the mortgagor can't or won't meet the terms of the loan. So, the next stage would be the public notice. So, after 3 to 6 months of missed payments, the lender records a public notice with the county recorder's office indicating na si mortgagor has defaulted on his mortgage. So, after this, the pre-foreclosure happens. So, ito yung tinatawag rin nating grace period. So, dahil napakabait ni mortgagee, nagbibigay pa to ng chance. So, magbibigay siya ng 90 to 120 days para ma-workout mo yung sitwasyon. Kung nakapagbayad ka, foreclosure ends. Pero kung hindi, the foreclosure continues. So, the next stage would be the auction. So, kung yung default is hindi pa rin na-remedy by the prescribed deadline, wala nang magagawa si mortgagee. Mapipilitan siyang yung property mo is masasold sa foreclosure auction or the public auction. So, tandaan natin na sa auction, mabebenta yung property na yun sa highest bidder. And lastly, the post-foreclosure stage. So, dito, kung walang nag-avail na third party sa public auction, si mortgagee na yung magte-take ng ownership doon sa property. Okay? And then, ayun, that's the stages of foreclosure. So, let us now move on to the next right, which is the right to sell. A right to sell without the intervention of the court when the mortgage money is not repaid by the mortgagor, he becomes entitled to sell the property to recover his debt. So, a right to sell is a clause written into a mortgage note authorizing the mortgagee to sell the property in the event of default in order to repay the mortgage debt. So, it is actually same lang halos kay foreclosure of sale. Ang kinaibahan lang, itong right to sell happens without the intervention of the court. So, mangyayari lang tong right to sell na to if it is stipulated in the mortgage contract. So, the procedures are first, the mortgagor defaults on the mortgage. So, kailangan ma-default muna yung mortgage. And then, public notice. And lastly, to appoint receiver. So, the public notice, in-indicate lang nun na yung property will be up for sale. So, the lender must follow specific guidelines and procedure to take action. Hindi lang dapat yung basta-basta. Kasi, nasa kontrata yun stipulated to sa contract. So, kailangan wag padalos-dalos. Kailangan makikita muna yung pagiging default ni mortgage bago siya magbenta. Okay? After the borrower defaults on the mortgage, the lender typically must give notice of the pending foreclosure. And the lender might need to use a third party to conduct the foreclosure sale. That is to appoint receiver. So, itong last procedure, connected to or interconnected with the next right, which is the right to appoint receiver. This right is dependent with the right to sell. So, the right to appoint receiver is any person who has been named in the mortgage deed and is willing and is able to act as a receiver may be appointed by the mortgage. So, yung taong to is nakasulat siya sa mortgage deed or the mortgage contract. And kailangan yung taong nakasulat doon is willing and able to act as a receiver. So, tinatawag rin natin tong special power of attorney. So, dahil nga sobrang dami na, sobrang busy ni mortgagee, kailangan niya mag-appoint ng isang tao na mag-handle ng sale. Mag-handle ng sale, mag-collect ng income, and etc. So, kailangan niya mag-appoint ng receiver. So, yun, may karapatan siyang gawin yun. So, let us now proceed with the next right, which is the right to sue for mortgage money. So, in the following 4 cases, the mortgagee has a right to sue for the mortgage money. So, number 1, when the mortgagor binds himself to repay the mortgage money but defaults. So, ayun, kanina pa natin binabanggit na syempre, kapag binind ni mortgagor yung sarili niya na magbayad siya sa ganitong date, pero hindi siya nakapagbayad, may karapatan doon si mortgagee. Then next, when the mortgage property is destroyed, wholly or partially without the fault of any party. So, kung yung mortgage property na na-receive ni mortgagee is destroyed, kahit hindi fault nung kahit na sinong party, may karapatan pa rin siya dun sa mortgage money. Okay? May karapatan pa rin siya dun. So, next is when the mortgagee is deprived of the whole or part of his security by wrongful act or default or of the mortgagor. And lastly, when rendered security is insufficient and mortgagee has given mortgagor a reasonable opportunity to provide further sufficient security but mortgagor has failed to do so. So ito, kapag yung na-render na security kay mortgagee is insufficient or hindi tugma sa value ng pinahiram niya na pera, si mortgagee, magbibigay pa rin siya ng reasonable opportunity para ma-provide ni mortgagor yung sufficient security. Dahil nga ang bait, sobrang bait talaga ni mortgagee. Char bias. So, pag si mortgagor, na failed pa rin siya dun sa chance na binigay ni mortgagee, may karapatan pa rin siya. May karapatan siyang isue or may karapatan siyang mag-sue for mortgage money. So, let us now proceed with the next right. So, the next right is the right to accession. So what is accession? Accession or addition to the property. This right to accession is nag-a-allow dun sa mortgagee na i-retain yung any addition sa property as security. So, if after the date of the mortgage, any accession made to the mortgage property, the mortgagee shall be entitled to such accession for the purposes of security of his mortgage debt. So, itong right to accession is available only in the absence of a contract. So, general rule to. Pag wala sa kontrata, ito yung automatically na mangyayari. So, for example, si A as a mortgagee, then si B as a mortgagor. Then, si A, nagpahiram siya ng 10 million kay B. So, the 10 million is the principal obligation. Then, si B naman, nag-mortgage siya ng land kay A as a security for his principal obligation. So, for instance, if si B na mortgagor, nag-build siya ng building doon sa land. Yan, ganda ng building natin. The mortgagee na si A may retain the building as a security for the loan. Okay, gets ba? Last but not the least, the right of mortgagee to spend money. A mortgagee may spend such money as is necessary in the absence of the contract to the contrary. So, just like the accession, itong right of mortgagee to spend money is general rule. So, kung wala sa kontrata, automatically, ito yung susundin. So, a mortgagee may spend such money if this is for the preservation of the mortgage property from destruction, forfeiture, or sale. So, kumpara naman sa ikagaganda, ikabubuti ng mortgage property, okay lang, may karapatan siyang mag-spend ng money. Next is when the mortgage property is renewable leasehold for the renewal of the lease. So, for example, yung mortgage property is leasehold. So, ang example nito is yung mortgagor, wala siyang sariling lupa, wala siyang sariling real estate. Kumbaga, yung mortgage niya is the rent space lang. So, kung ganon yung sitwasyon, may karapatang mag-spend ng money si mortgagee para i-renew yung lease. Alright, basta may karapatan siya para sa ikagaganda ng mortgage property. So, that would be all. Thank you.
Next is all about the obligation of the mortgagee, meaning si creditor. So first is bound to bring one suit on several mortgages. So bound to bring one suit on several mortgages if a mortgagee holds two or more mortgages of the same property or of different properties from the same mortgagor, he must enforce all or more in the absence of a contract to the contrary. It provides that a mortgagee who holds two or more mortgages executed by the same mortgagor, and he shall be bound to sue on all of the mortgages in respect of which the mortgage money has become due. So, ibig sabihin ng bound to bring one suit on several mortgages is kung yung isang property ay naka-mortgage sa'yo, ay ginamit ng mortgagor na pang-secure ng dalawa o higit pang utang o kaya naman dalawa o higit pang property pero iisa lang yung mortgagor or debtor tapos yung mortgage is nag-due na. So, si mortgagee ay pwede niyang i-take yung legal actions para doon sa mortgage ni mortgagor. So, syempre, isipin natin, madami siyang utang sa'yo tapos iisa lang yung property na mortgage. So, pag nag-due yun, mahirapan ka na singilin lahat ng utang. Kaya, obligation mo na mag-take na lang ng sue or legal actions. Yun po ang ibig sabihin ng bound to bring one suit on several mortgages. So, the next is liabilities of the mortgagee and possession. So, this section says that when during the continuance of the mortgage, the mortgagee takes possessions of the mortgage property, he is bound by the following duties. So, liabilities of the mortgagee and possession, ibig sabihin, kung yung property na minortgage kay mortgagee ay nasa kanya yung possession, ibig sabihin siya namamahala o siya yung may control ng property. Ito ang mga dapat niyang gawin. So, una is duty to manage the property as a persons of ordinary prudence. So, ibig sabihin ng una is duty niya na pangalagaan ito ng maayos. Kumbaga, ordinary diligence. Pangalawa naman is duty to collect rents and profits of the property to the best endeavor. So, ibig sabihin ng pangalawa is kung yung property is under lease, syempre, siya ang mangongolekt ng mga rents and profits. The next is duty to pay government dues unless there is a contract to the contrary. So, ibig sabihin ng pangatlo is that kung may mga public charges na nag-arise during the possession, kailangan ito bayaran ni mortgagee. Halimbawa, mga taxes or interest. So, pang-apat is duty to make necessary repairs of the mortgage property unless there is a contract to the contrary. So, yung pang-apat is ibig sabihin nun, dapat yung ayusin kung may mga nasira o mga kailangan gawin dun sa property since nasa kanya yung possession, unless there is a contract to the contrary. Next is duty not to commit any act which may destroy or injure the property permanently. So, yung panglima is duty niya rin na huwag gagawa ng kung ano man na makakasira permanently doon sa property. So, the next is duty to apply insurance money in reinstating the property or in reductions of the mortgage money if he receives such money in respect of the mortgage property. So, yung the next is, ibig sabihin nun, obligation niya rin na magkaroon ng insurance money or financial protection for the property o kabawasan doon sa utang na binabayaran. And the next one is duty to keep proper accounts of all sums received and spent by him as a mortgagee. So, yung pang-pito, ibig sabihin nun, duty niya rin na magkaroon ng proper records sa mga payments na na-receive niya kay mortgager at sa mga expenses na ginastos niya. And the next one is duty to apply rents and profits in discharge of interest of making certain deductions. So, ibig sabihin nun is pag nakaka-receive siya ng rent and profits under doon sa property na nasa kanyang possession, kailangan niya itong ibawas doon sa interest ng mortgage property. And last but not the least is duty to account for gross receipts. Ibig sabihin ng panghuli is that kailangan niya magkaroon ng proper records or accounts ng total na pera na nare-receive niya under the property. So that's it for the liabilities of the mortgagee and possessions.
Naiinig ka na ba?
Wag!
Don't!
No. Hindi po. Hindi ko po naisip yun.
Oo, wait lang.
Ginagawa mo.
Hindi na talaga ako. Bye! Pagbilang kong 10, nakaihi na kayo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Nanghiram siya ng 1,000 kay B. At si B ay nagdemand ng stereo kapalit nung 1,000 kay A.
Ang nakita sa video ay isang halimbawa ng pledge. Ito ay pledge dahil sa ang pledgor ay kailangang magbigay o mag-deliver ng bagay, movable man o document evidencing incorporeal rights sa pledgee. Kung saan ang pagsusurrender mo ng bagay na yun ay for securing na mapafulfill yung obligation sa iyo ni pledgor. Kapag na-fulfill naman na yung obligation, yung sinurrender mong bagay or ni pledgor ay mababalik na sa kanya with all its roots and accessions. Makikita nga natin dito na si pledgor ay si character A, si pledgee ay si character B, at ang stereo na sinurrender ni character A kay B ay ang pledged property. Ano-ano nga ba yung characteristics ng pledge? Actually, na-discuss na to ang mga last reporters. So, papasadahan na lang natin. Una ay ang accessory. Hindi siya mag-exist without the principal obligation or dependent siya sa principal obligation. Pangalawa ay ang real contract. It requires that something should be transferred or delivered from one party to the other or from pledgor to pledgee. Pangatlo ay it should be indivisible. The lien or the claims against the thing pledged still continues unless otherwise the obligation it secures has been fully paid. Ang pang-apat ay ang unilateral contract. It creates obligation sa part lang ng obligee, wherein he or she must free the encumbrance once na na-fulfill na yung obligation. And lastly ay subsidiary. Ito yung obligation incurred does not arise until the non-fulfillment of obligation or non-payment of debt. There are actually two kinds of pledge. Una ay conventional pledge. It is constituted pag sila ay MU or may mutual understanding or mutual consent na pag-agrihan ng both parties. May meeting of minds na naganap. Pangalawa ay legal pledge. Ito naman ay created through operations of law. So, let's all dive in sa unang kind, the conventional pledge. We're going to touch the requisites, object, form, extent, rights and obligation of pledgor and pledgee, and its extinguishment. Sa requisites, paano nga ba natin masasabi na ito ay isang conventional pledge? Una, ito ay nagsesecure para ma-fulfill yung principal obligation. Since isa nga sa characteristic nito ay isa siyang accessory. For it to exist, kailangan may principal obligation muna. Pangalawa, si pledgor ang absolute owner. Kasi di mo naman pwedeng i-pledge yung bagay na hindi sa'yo. Unless otherwise, dyan napapasok si requisite number 3. Pag ikaw ay inauthorize ng third person na gamitin mo yung property niya na ipam-pledge. Diba? Sana all talaga sis. So, number 4. Kailangan yung bagay na ipinledge mo ay in possession of creditor or by the third person by common agreement. Tapos may na-search din ako na yung possession of pledge, may two ways yan. Una, yung actual possession, meaning physical possession. Halimbawa, si Mary,
kinip niya yung stereo na pinledge sa kanya ni John sa bahay niya. Ibig sabihin, hawak mo talaga mismo yung pinledge na bagay. Or it can be a constructive possession, meaning that yung pledgee has some control over the property. Nag-occur lang to pag yung actual possession ay imposible. Halimbawa, a pledgee has a constructive possession of the contents of the pledger safety deposit box at the bank when the pledger gives the pledgee the only key to the box. Ibig sabihin, yung susi lang yung binigay niya. Parang representation lang dun sa pinledge niyang bagay. Pero, sinasabi dito na it requires delivery of the thing to acquire its perfection. No actual delivery is equals to pledge will be void. Ito yung sinasabi sa case ni Betita at Ganson na dapat actual delivery lang daw at hindi merely symbolic yung pledge na ibibigay. Kasi tama naman siya. Kasi para saan pa yung pledge? The delivery itself lies the security of the thing pledge. As a pledgee, syempre, kailangan mong protektahan yung pinledge sa'yo kasi ikaw din yung mawawalan kapag nasira or nawala yung pledge, yung ipinledge sa'yo. But, what if yung bagay na pinledge sa'yo ay is impossible to be delivered? Dito napapasok yung constructive possession wherein sa case ni Bangko Espanyol Filipino and Peterson, the Philippine Supreme Court has held that yung pag-deliver ng keys ng warehouse containing yung stock of merchandise na pinledge is adequate transfer of possession na daw. So, the contract of pledge is valid. In addition, when rights evidenced by instrument or document of title are pledged, the instrument or document must be delivered to the creditor. So, yun lang yan guys. Goods pa ba kayo dyan? Sabihin nyo lang kung hindi na. Charing lang. Let's move on to the object of pledge. Una ay movables. It simply refers to the personal property. So, makikita nyo dito yung sasakyan, jewelries, ganun. Next is incorporeal rights. Ito daw yung rights that can't be seen or touched, often dealing with intangible properties. So, bonds, trademarks, copyrights, patents, yun. When in form of pledge naman, we have two. First is between the parties. Pwedeng in verbal or written or simply the delivery itself of the object is enough to bind the both parties. Next is as regards to third person. Para mag-take effect siya sa third person, kailangan yung pledge must be in a public instrument, showing the description of thing pledged and the date kung kailan nangyari yung pledge. For the extents of the pledge, it will cover una, of course, yung bagay na pinledge mo. Pangalawa, yung fruits, income, dividends, or interest na na-earn or na-produce ng thing pledged. Unless there is a stipulation na ina-exclude sila. Halimbawa, si D, nangutang siya ng 10K kay C, which bears a 1% interest per month. So, itong obligation na to was secured by shares of stock owned by D. And, in addition, si D, dineliver niya yung certificate of stock nitong pledged property niya. And inallow niya, inauthorize niya si C na i-claim yung dividends na mabebear nung pledge item. So, dumating na nga yung first month. Magki-claim ka na ng dividends. Halimbawa, yung dividends na nakuha mo is 250. And, pwede mong i-less yung 1% interest per month ni D sa'yo. So, ang matitira ay 150, which can be reduced to the principal obligation of D. Pangatlo, if the thing pledged is animal, its offspring will also be part of the pledge unless ulit there is stipulation na in-exclude sila.
Let's talk about the debtor or pledgor. These are the rights of a pledgor. The first one is to alienate the thing pledged. As a pledgor, you have the right to transfer the ownership of the things you pledge as long as may consent ni pledgee. Pero, si pledgee may control pa rin or may possession pa rin dun sa bagay na pinledge mo kasi hindi mo pa naman siya nababayaran. To ask that the thing pledge be judicial or extrajudicial deposit. When we say judicial, dumaan sa korte or may process from the court. And when we say extrajudicial, out of court procedure, but there is a power of attorney inserted dun sa kontrata ninyo. To continue to be the owner of the thing pledged. So kahit na pinledge mo yung isang bagay, yung ownership mananatili pa rin sa'yo. To ask for its return. Kapag nabayaran mo na yung principal obligation, kasama na yung interest, and then yung expenses na nagastos ni pledgee sa pagpe-preserve ng asset na pinledge mo, pwede niya na yung ibalik sa iyo. Kasi, nasettle mo na yung obligation sa kanya. To require to be deposited with a third person. Kung ikaw naman yung tipo ng tao na may trust issue, kumbaga, wala kang tiwala kay pledgee or hindi ka sure na kaya niyang alagaan o ingatan yung bagay na pinledge mo, you have the right to deposit it with a third person para na rin sa safety ng asset mo. To demand its return upon offering another thing in pledge. Dito, kapag nag-offer ka kay pledgee ng panibagong bagay, kapalit ng unang bagay na pinledge mo, dapat the second pledge will be of the same kind and quality dun sa unang pledge. Let's move on to the obligations of a pledgor. Pay the debt and its interest. Kapag nangungutang ka, syempre dapat bayaran mo. Kasama na rin yung interest na nakapatong o included dun sa inutang mo. The next one is, pay damages that the pledgee may suffer by reason of the loss of the thing pledged. So, for example, ikaw pledgor, yung bagay na pinledge mo kay pledgee is kotse. And then, nung naka-pledgee na yon, hindi mo sinabi na may flaws pala yung kotse na yon. Siyempre, si pledgee hindi siya aware, hindi niya yun alam. So, lahat ng damages mula doon sa bagay na pinledge mo, ikaw yung sasagot. Kasi, at the first place, hindi naman yun kasalanan ni pledgee. Kanina ang topic natin si pledgor. Ngayon, dumako naman tayo sa iba't ibang rights ni pledgee or creditor. To retain possession of the thing pledged. Hanggat hindi pa siya nababayaran ni pledgor, mananatili sa kanya yung control dun sa bagay na pinledge. To demand reimbursement for its preservation. So, habang pinapangalagaan niya yung bagay na pinledge, syempre may mga expenses siya or mga nagastos. Pwede niya yung pabayaran kay pledgor. Next, to bring actions which pertains to the owner. So, halimbawa, nakalagay sa kontrata nyo na yung bagay na pinledge ni pledgor is laptop. And then, bago pa mapunta sa'yo yung laptop, nalaman mo na nasa ibang tao yon. May right ka na ma-recover yon mula sa third person. Kasi, yun yung napagkasunduan ninyo ni pledgor at yun yung nasa kontrata. To cause the sale of the thing pledged at a public sale. Kapag may mga asset kasi na bumababa yung value, hindi ba, habang tumatagal. So, kapag yung tining na pinledge is ganun yung nangyari, pwede mo siyang ibenta in public. Dito na papasok yung public auction or magkakaroon ng bidding para dun sa asset na naka-pledge. Yung proceeds na makukuha mula dun sa bidding or public auction, mapupunta kay pledgee. Kasi, yun yung magiging security dun sa principal obligation ni pledgor sa kanya. If he is deceived of its substance. Ito parang yung halimbawa kanina. 'Di ba? Ang bagay na pinledge ni pledgor is yung sasakyan or kotse. Ngayon, hindi aware si pledgee na may flaws pala yon. Nung nalaman niya na niloko siya or napaniwala siya ni pledgor na okay yung sasakyan, may dalawang option siyang pwedeng gawin. Una, claim another thing. Ibig sabihin, pwede siyang manghingi, mag-demand kay pledgor na ng ibang bagay kapalit nung unang pledge. Pangalawa, demand immediate payment. Pwede niyang sabihin kay pledgor na, uy, bayaran mo na ako. Bayaran mo na yung utang mo sa akin. Use the thing pledge if authorized and if necessary. So, kapag may authorization or pumayag si pledgor na gamitin mo yung bagay na pinledge, you have the right to use it. O kung hindi naman is, para naman yun sa preservation ng asset na pinledge, you can use it. To collect and receive the amount due. Ito para mas maintindihan nyo, magbibigay ako ng example. Halimbawa, si Do, nakatanggap siya ngayon ng promissory note worth 50,000 galing kay Re, which is due on December 25. Afterwards, etong si Do naubusan ng pera. Kaya ang ginawa niya, nangutang siya ngayon kay Me. And ginamit niyang pledge yung promissory note worth 40,000 pesos. So, pagdating ng December 25, si Me can collect the 50,000 pesos from Re. Kapag nakuha niya na yung 50,000 pesos, pwede niya nang i-claim yung 40,000 na utang sa kanya ni Do. So, ang mangyayari, yung surplus na 10K, dapat i-deliver or ibalik ni Me kay Do. Kasi, 40,000 lang naman yung utang sa kanya. Last, to sell it upon default of the debtor. Kapag hindi na talaga kayang magbayad ni debtor or pledgor, kung wala na siyang kakayahan na bayaran ka kasi sobrang naghihirap na siya, pwede mo nang ibenta ngayon yung pinledge na bagay. Let's move on to the obligations of a pledgee. To take care of the thing pledge. Kailangan, kapag may pinagkatiwala sa'yo o yung bagay na pinledge, dapat ingatan mo. To take care of it, to be liable for its loss or deterioration. Habang nasa yung bagay na pinledge, kung magkaroon man ng damages or flaws, yung asset ni pledgor, ikaw yung magiging liable. Maliban na lang kung yung naging dahilan ng pagkasira ng bagay na pinledge is hindi mo kasalanan or from fortuitous event, hindi inaasahang pangyayari. To be responsible for the acts of its agent or employees with respect to the thing pledged. So, kapag ikaw pinagkatiwala mo yung bagay na pinledge sa'yo ni pledger sa employee mo, lahat ng actions na gagawin ng yung employee, ikaw yung magiging responsable. Not to deposit it with a third person. Obligasyon mong hindi yon i-deposit sa ibang tao kasi hindi mo naman yun pagmamayari. Not to use it. Hindi mo rin dapat yun gamitin maliban na lang kung authorized or may consent mula kay pledger o kung hindi naman kaya is para yun sa preservation ng bagay na pinledge. And last, to deliver the surplus. Dito, halimbawa binenta mo yung bagay na pinledge in public and then yung proceeds is mas mataas kaysa dun sa utang sa'yo ni pledger. Yung sobra, kailangan mong ibalik kay pledger. My last report is all about the rights of the third person who pledges his own movable property to secure the debt of another. Number 1, to be indemnified by the debtor if he pays the creditor. Kung ikaw yung third person at binayaran mo yung utang ng ibang tao, ang mangyayari, sa'yo na magiging liable si debtor. Ikaw na yung babayaran niya kasi nga, sinettle mo na yung utang niya kay creditor. And then, kasama dun sa babayaran ni debtor sa'yo, yung principal obligation or amount of debt, legal interest, yung expenses na na-incurred, at pati na rin yung damages kung meron man. Number 2, to be subrogated to all the rights of the creditor against the debtor if he pays the creditor. So, ito yung example para mas madali nating maintindihan. Halimbawa, si A nangutang ng 15,000 kay B. So, kung ikaw yung pledgee, syempre gusto mo may assurance na mababayaran ni debtor yung utang niya. So, ang ginawa netong si A, naghanap siya ngayon ng guarantor, which is si C. After that, ang ginawang pledge ni A para sa utang niya kay B is yung ring ni D. Once na binayaran ni D yung utang ni A kay B, wala nang habol si B kay A kasi nasettle na yung obligation sa kanya. Ang mangyayari, magkakaroon ng utang si A kay D. Ibig sabihin, magiging second pledgee si D. Kapag naman wala na talagang kakayahan magbayad ng utang si A, kumbaga lubog na siya, wala na siyang mahanapan, hindi niya na magawa ng paraan, pwedeng habulin ni D si C. Kasi si C, yung tumayong guarantor ni A. Number 3, to be released from liability in the following cases. If the creditor voluntarily accepts immovable or other property in payment of the debt. For example, si A, nangutang siya ng 100,000 kay B. And then, ang ginamit na pledge sa utang ni A is yung laptop ni C. Ngayon, nung due date na, itong si A, nag-offer siya ng parcel of land kay B para pambayad dun sa utang niya. And tinanggap naman yun ni B. So, ang mangyayari, si C, marirelease na from liability. Kasi nga, nasettle na ni A yung utang niya kay B. Second one is, creditor grants debtor extension without pledger's consent. So, kapag napagkasunduan ni debtor and ni creditor na bigyan ng palugit para makapagbayad si debtor ng utang niya nang walang consent ng third person, mawawalan na rin ng liability yung third person sa creditor. Last, if through some act of the creditor, the pledgor can be subrogated to the rights of the creditor. So, parang yung halimbawa sa number 2. Kapag si B, which is the creditor, hindi siya pumayag na maging guarantor ni A si C, ang mangyayari, marirelease na from liability si D. Kasi kapag binayaran ni D si B, mawawalan siya ng habol kay C kasi nga hindi pinayagan ni creditor na maging guarantor ni A si C.
Opo. Crispy? Crispy? Ikaw po yung Crispy. Crispy! Ikaw po si Basilia? Crispy! Ito. Basilia! Ito si Crispy! Kayo, nakita niyo ba si Crispy at Basilia?
So ngayon ay dumako naman tayo sa extinguishment of pledge. Kapag sinabi nating extinguishment, it is the cancellation of right. So when we say extinguishment of pledge, it is the cancellation of right of the thing pledged. Gets? So pledge can be extinguished directly or indirectly. Unahin muna natin yung indirect cost. So when we say indirect cost, it is the principal obligation extinguished equals to accessory contract extinguished. Ibig sabihin lang nito na if the debtor pays the principal obligation, then accessory contract, which is the thing pledge, will also be extinguished. Example, si JK umutang kay V ng 10,000. So to secure the debt, JK pledge his wristwatch. So if JK pays the debt to V, then the debt is extinguished as well as the thing pledge, which is the wristwatch. At ngayon, ay dumako naman tayo sa direct cost. Pledge may be extinguished directly as follows. Medyo marami-rami po siya. Una, return of the thing by the pledgee to the pledger. Ibig sabihin na if the thing pledge is returned by the pledgee to the pledger, then the pledge is extinguished. Any stipulation that the pledge is not extinguished by the return of the thing is void. Next, prima facie presumption that pledgee returned the thing pledged. Pag sinabi natin prima facie, it is something that has been proven or assumed. So, ibig sabihin na to, prima facie presumption na yung bagay ay naibalik na and therefore, the thing pledge has been extinguished. If the thing pledge is found in the possession of the pledger or owner, so, nakay-owner na yung mismong bagay or yung the thing pledge. Next, if the thing pledge is found in the possession of the third person who has received it from the pledger or owner. So, yung position naman nung thing pledge is on the third person and natanggap nito mismo sa pledger or owner. So, next is
their renunciation or abandonment in writing by the pledgee of the pledge. Ibig sabihin lang nito na nagsulat si pledgee that he abandons the thing pledged. Therefore, the pledge is extinguished. Either the acceptance by the pledger or owner of the renunciation or the return of the thing pledged is not necessary for such mode of extinguishing pledge. Hindi daw kailangan. The pledgee becomes a depository upon the renunciation if in the meantime the thing pledged is not yet returned to the owner. So since nagsulat na nga si pledgee na he abandons the pledge, then for the meantime, he becomes the depository if ever man na hindi pa nabalik kay pledger yung thing pledge. So next, sale of the thing pledge. So when the thing pledge is sold, then pledge is extinguished. Formalities of the sale shall be by public auction, through a notary public, and with the notice to the debtor and the owner of the thing pledge is stating the amount for which the public sale is to be held. At sino-sino nga ba yung pwedeng magbid sa public auction? The pledger or owner? Ay, sa pledger or owner pala, dito sinasabi na he can only bid if and only if he offers the same terms as the highest bidder. Then, in the pledgee, dito naman, pwede siya. Pero, not valid kapag siya lang ang mismong bidder. Next are the third persons. Siyempre. 3. The required amounts of bids. All bids shall offer to pay the purchase price at once. Ibig sabihin, isang bagsakan. 4. Effects of sale. If price is greater than the obligation, then the excess would be on the debtor if there is an agreement. Kung wala, kay creditor na yung excess. Then, if price is lesser than the obligation, then deficiency will not be recovered by the creditor or the pledgee. So, para mas magets nyo siya, here's an example. Si JK, umutang kay V ng 15,000. So, to secure the debt, JK pledged his laptop, which is delivered to V at the time he received the 15,000. But if JK failed to pay, then V has the right to sell it. If V sells it, then JK's debt will be extinguished. If V sells it for 14,000, then there would be a deficit of 1,000 which will not be recovered by V. But if V sells it for 16,000, then there would be an excess which belongs to C unless there is an agreement between both parties that any excess shall be turned over to JK. Gets po ba? Rule when two or more things are pledged. Big sabihin, maraming nakapledge to secure the debt. If this so happens, the pledgee may choose which he will cause to be sold unless there is a contrary stipulation. Ibig sabihin, nasa sa pledgee or creditor kung ilan yung ibebenta niya para lang makabayad si debtor nung utang niya. And lastly, appropriation of the thing pledge. If the thing pledge is not sold in the first and second actions, the creditor may appropriate the thing pledge. Sinabi natin appropriate, it is considered as full payment of his entire claim. Dito, sinasabi na the debtor is not entitled for the excess or sa sobra if the value of the thing pledge is more than its principal obligation. So, wala na siyang karapatan if ever man na may excess yun. Kay creditor na lahat iyon. Yan lang. Tapos na po tayo sa extinguishments of pledge. Dumako naman tayo sa legal pledge. Alamin natin yung concept, some examples, and then rules applicable to legal pledge. Pag sinabi natin legal pledge, ano nga ba ito? Legal pledge is a pledge by operation of law. Legal law. Right of a person to retain a thing until he receives payment of his claim. Ito yung karapatan ng tao dun sa bagay na pledge until he receives payment of his claim. So here's some examples of legal pledge. Una, possessory lien by the possessory in good faith. A possessor in good faith may retain the movable upon which he has incurred necessary and useful expenses until he has been reimbursed therefor. Pag sinabi kasi nating possessor in good faith, ito yung taong naniniwala na siya talaga yung may-ari ng property even though he is not. Then, when we say possessory lien, ito naman yung karapatan ng creditor na ma-reimburse siya if ever na nag-incurred siya ng pera para may saayos yung bagay na binili niya dun sa possessor in good faith. So, para mas magets nyo siya, here's an example. Example, si JK bumili kay V ng motor, believing that V is the owner. So, nung kay JK na yung motor, nag-decide siya na ipa-repair yung mga deteriorating parts nito, which cost him 1,000. And then, later on, dumating si Jimin. Sabi ni Jimin, ako ang tunay na may-ari ng motor. And he proves it through papers. Pero, yung possession ng motor na yon ay na kay JK pa rin. Until Jimin pays him the 1,000 pesos na binayad ni JK para ipa-repair yung mga deteriorating parts. Gets? Big sabihin, may claim ka. So dito, So, dito na papasok yung sinasabi dun sa concept ni legal pledge na right of a person to retain a thing until he receives payment of his claim. Gets? Number 2. Possessory lien of worker. He who has executed work upon a movable has right to retain it by the way of pledge until he is paid. Ibig sabihin, may karapatan yung taong yon dun sa movable pledge kasi nag-execute siya ng work until he is paid. Example, para mas magets niyo pa. Si JK, pinaayos yung wristwatch niya kay V. And then, V has the position of the wristwatch until JK paid him. So, if JK paid him, kay JK na yung position no wristwatch. Gets? Number 3. Depository's right of retention. The depository may retain the thing deposited until the full payment of what may have been due to him by reason of deposit. Ganun lang din yun. It's just that it's deposit. Example, warehouseman has the right or may karapatan siya dun sa goods deposited na nasa warehouse niya because of legal pledge. Diba? Pag sinabi nating legal pledge, it is the right of a person to retain a thing until he receives payment of his claim. So, ibig sabihin, the goods deposited is in the position of warehouseman until the depository will pay him the storage cost. So, if the depository paid him for the storage cost, then the ownership would be on the depository. Gets? So, ngayon ay dumako naman tayo sa rules applicable to the legal pledge. Dito, sinasabi na si conventional at legal pledge has the same provision when it comes to the possession, care, and sale of the thing, as well as on the termination of the pledge. Pero, sa part of the sale of the thing, may mga rules yon para mangyari. Kasi nga, legal pledge is constituted by the operations of law. Una, the thing may be sold only after demand of the amount for which the thing is retained. Ibig sabihin, ang bagay na plinedge ay pwede ibenta pag nag-demand na yung pledgee or baka dumating na yung due date nung pagbabayad. Next, number 2. The public auction shall take place within 1 month after such demand. Ibig sabihin lang nito na pwede na mag-public auction or pwede na i-public auction ang thing pledge within 1 month after mag-demand ng payment. Next. 3. Dito, sinasabi lang na if creditor does not cause the public sale to be held within such period, pwede na kunin ni debtor yung thing pledge. Then, lastly, number 4, Dito, sinasabi na kapag nabenta na ni pledgee yung item, then nabawas na yung utang pati expenses, yung sobra ay ibibigay kay pledger. That's all.
Excess of proceeds of sale or deficiency. So, dito, nabenta na yung plinedge na thing. So, paano nga ba kung may excess or deficiency upon sale? Malinaw naman sa atin ang conventional and legal. So, conventional, ito yung mutual consent of pledgor and pledgee. Sa legal naman, it is created by operation of law. For example, meron kang pinledge na laptop. Nabenta mo siya worth 90,000. And yung halaga niya is 80,000. May excess ka na 10,000. So, kanino nga ba yung mapupunta? Pag conventional, mapupunta siya sa creditor. Pero sa legal, mapupunta siya sa debtor. Paano naman kung baliktad yung nangyari? So, meron ka ulit laptop. And nabenta mo siya ng mas mababa, 70,000. And yung halaga niya, katulad kanina, 80,000. So, may 10,000 na deficiency. Sa conventional, si creditor, hindi nga na pwedeng ma-recover yung deficiency. Creditor is not entitled to recover any agreement to the contrary is void. So, sa legal naman, si creditor, may habol siya kay debtor na ma-recover yung deficiency. Pactum commissorium. It is a stipulation in a pledge or mortgage which provides for automatic forfeiture that ownership if the thing, pledge, or mortgage shall pass to the creditor by the mere default of the debtor. Ito yung automatic na mapupunta sa creditor yung isinangla, yung pledge or minortgage na property or thing dahil hindi nakapagbayad on time o sunod yung date na nakasulat sa contract. So, fault ng debtor na hindi siya nakapagbayad. So, automatic na mapupunta yung pledge or minortgage niya sa creditor. Elements of pactum commissorium. Ano nga ba yung elements ng pactum commissorium? It enables the mortgagee to acquire ownership of the mortgage property without the need of foreclosure proceedings. Paano nga ba natin masasabi kung applicable yung pactum commissorium? Dapat, there should be a property mortgage by the way for the security for the payment of the principal obligation. Dapat may property involved as a collateral or security. In case na hindi mabayaran ni debtor si creditor, second, there should be a stipulation for automatic appropriation by the creditor of the thing mortgage in case of non-payment of the principal obligation within the stipulated period. Dapat nasa kondisyon sa contract na in case hindi makapagbayad yung debtor sa napag-usapang date or period, pwedeng matransfer yung ownership ng pledge or minortgage kay creditor. So, example ng pactum commissorium. So, noong January 1, 2020, sabi ni Beshi, Mars pautang ng 5 million pesos. And yung bahay at lupa, minortgage ni Beshi kay Mars as security. So, pinautang siya ni Mars. Gumawa sila ng contract na sa January 1, 2023, pag hindi nabayaran ni Beshi yung 5 million kay Mars, automatic na mapupunta kay Mars yung house and lot ni Beshi. So, pinanotarize na rin nila yan. And this concept or this setup and contract is called pactum commissorium, and it is void and invalid contract. So, ito yung sample contract ng Pactum Commissorium. So, ito yung karaniwang makikita natin sa mga kapitbahay natin. Pag gipit sila, ginagawa nilang or sinasangla nila yung bahay at lupa nila. Kunwari dito, sinangla niya yung bahay at lupa niya sa halagang 2 million. Nakasaad din dito kung hindi niya mababayaran yung utang na ito, sa itinakdang araw, ang pagmamay-ari or ownership ng security collateral ay automatic na mapupunta sa nagpautang o sa creditor. Pumirma na rin dyan yung debtor, yung creditor, pinanotarize na rin nila. Pero, based sa Article 2088 of the Civil Code, the creditor prohibits from appropriating the things given by the way of pledge or mortgage, or from disposing them. Any stipulation to the contrary is null and void. So, this contract or pactum commissorium, katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, is void and invalid. The stipulation is void if it's contrary to morals and public policy. So, katulad kaganina, may house and lot ka worth 5 million pesos. Pero, ginawa mo siyang security collateral sa halagang 2 million. So, may 3 million ka na malulugi in case mapunta kay creditor yung ownership ng house and lot mo. So, magkakaroon ng injustice. Kasi normally, the obligation is less than the value of the property. As protection mo, as debtor, diba karaniwan ginigipit si debtor, lalo na kung hindi kayo beshe-beshe ng creditor. As security mo, itong pactum commissorium is considered as void contract. Creditor can only collect his claims for the proceeds when he moved for the sale of the thing pledged or mortgage after the principal obligation becomes due. So, pwede lang i-request ni creditor na ibenta yung property if due date or lagpas na sa napag-usapang date at hindi pa rin bayad yung debtor ng principal obligation niya. The mortgagee or pledgee can purchase the thing pledged or mortgage at its current price if the debt is not paid on time is valid. So, si creditor, pwede nga i-purchase yung property at its current price or add na lang siya ng certain amount since may utang naman sa kanya si debtor. The pledge or mortgagee can also bid at the public auction of the pledge or mortgage. So, 'di ba? Hindi nga kaya magbayad ni debtor ng principal obligation. So, magkakaroon ng foreclosure at mapupunta siya sa public auction. Si creditor, pwede siyang mag-bid din doon. Appropriation of property pledge or mortgage. So, ano nga ba appropriation? Ito yung pag-angkin natin sa pinledge or minortgage. First, sa pledge. Pledgee is allowed only if the thing is not sold at two public auction. Pwede niya lang i-appropriate pag nakakadalawang public auction na and hindi pa rin nabibenta. Pledgee is required in this case to give an acquittance for his entire claim. So, ano nga ba yung acquittance? Ito yung written receipt revealing the settlement of debt. So, after ng two public auction and hindi pa rin nabibenta, si pledgee is required in this case to give an written receipt revealing the settlement of debt. So, in mortgage, in no case is appropriation of the property mortgage is allowed. So, hindi pwedeng ma-appropriate ang isang minortgage.